How are we doing today? Good? Everybody okay? Yeah? That's good. Dude, I love Pastor Brian. You guys love Brian. Those of you who attend here, you love this guy and your staff. You have a great staff. If you're new, welcome. I'm kind of new too. I've only been here like 4 or 5 times, so I'm new as well. We can be new together. If I lived in this area, this is a church I would attend. Because this is a place where people have different backgrounds. People come from different places. But we all join together and we follow Jesus no matter where we are, no matter if we believe or we don't believe yet, or we're questioning or we're doubting or we're firm in our belief. We all join together. We do life together. So hopefully you keep on checking out this church, and thankfully you have a little bit of eye candy today. You're not used to that. You're not going to get that next week. So just understand that, and hopefully you're still going to come back and you can embrace that. Brian is okay to look at compared to this. Anyway, I'm so glad to be with you. I'm originally from Los Angeles. We live down there. We enjoy not having money. So yeah, we live down there. My wife and family. And my wife is beautiful. She couldn't be with me, but she is goes to the gym every single day. She has a 6-pack. I think you could tell I enjoy Netflix a little too much. She is a muy caliente Latina. In her wildest imagination, she had no clue that her knight in shining armor looked like a cross between Gru, Dr. Fester, or Dr. Evil Uncle Fester right here. I mean, look at this right here. This is what she wakes up to every morning. She is a lucky, lucky lady, okay? And we have 2 kids. We have a 15-year-old son named Joel who thinks he's the master of the universe because he's like 2 years away from his black belt in Krav Maga. And we have my daughter, Rachel, who is 13 and just going on 19. My son is 5'11", obviously doesn't get that from my side of the family. He's like, Dad, I'm taller than you. And I'm like, Joel, many people have accomplished this goal. I need you, pun intended, to set your sights higher. Some of you might be wondering, why in the world did Pastor Brian invite Gru to come here and talk to us about sexuality? Because that's awkward. I'd rather he talk about it or somebody else or so on and so forth. And I get that. I understand that. So let me, before I begin, tell you a little bit about my story. And you can maybe see why I talk about this and I write about this and I travel and I talk to other churches about this, okay? So when I was 2 years old, I lived in Columbia, Missouri, and my parents were both professors at the University of Missouri, Columbia. They divorced, and both of them went into same-sex relationships. My dad never had a monogamous partner. He had several friends. My mom was in a 22-year relationship with a psychologist named Vera. They moved to the Kansas City, home of the greatest football team in the NFL. Goodbye. I get it. You're jealous. I get it. I get it. Hopefully you guys aren't can't even say the name of the team from Oakland that's now in Vegas. Sorry, it's too early in the morning. I'm not going to throw up in front of you because I won't try to say that name again. And I get it. Some of you don't like the Chiefs. You're jealous of our quarterback. I get it. But did you know he's like a Christian? I don't know if you knew that. Like 18 months ago, became a Christian. He gives like half of his income to kids in the foster system, which I think is pretty awesome. But first of all, he's a Christian. So you should cheer for him because you'll be with him in eternity. Or maybe you won't. I don't know. Do you see what I did there? Do you like that? There's plenty more where that came from. If you guys are going to throw shade at me like you did, gaslighting me when I said home of the greatest football team. Anyway, we'll go on. We won't say the name of that other team ever again. So when they moved to Kansas City, my mother and her partner, they actually became activists. They joined the local board of directors for GLAAD. When I was growing up, preschool, elementary, middle school, they took me with them to bars and clubs and campouts and pride parades and activist events. And I learned this real quick, that Christians hate gay people. If you are not like them, then they, Christians, will not like you. I saw it one time in a parade that I was marching in with my mom and her partner, and at the end of it, there were these so-called Christians holding up signs saying, God hates you, no room for you. And when people from my mom's parade would go try to talk to them, they would get sprayed with water and urine saying, this is what Jesus thinks of you. I remember as a kid looking at my mom, I said, why are they acting like this? And she said, well, Caleb, they are Christians, and Christians hate gay people. If you're not like them, they will not like you. I saw it proved again and again. I saw it proved in the hospital rooms of young men in the 80s and 90s who had contracted HIV that had turned into AIDS, and on their deathbed, their Christian family either didn't show up, or if they were there, they wouldn't touch them or talk to them because they were taking a moral stand. Like, there's a difference between taking a moral stand and being a moron. Okay, hear me out on this. God doesn't care how much you know if you don't have any compassion to show. God could give a rip how much of this you have memorized if you cannot love people. You're like, Caleb, I don't like that. Well, I mean, Paul wrote it, not me. Get mad at him. God's got an idea. Trust me, if I wrote the Bible, it'd look different, okay? But, like, when you and I have no love, we're like a clanging cymbal in the ear of God. He basically says in Corinthians, that's annoying. I don't know if you read in the Old Testament what God does to annoying people, but I wouldn't do that if I were you. And so, like, I just grew up hating Christians. And here's my thought. If Christians are this bad and Jesus is their leader, I can't imagine how awful Jesus Christ is. Because I really think we underestimate how much our words and our actions and treatment of people, how we talk about them or how others hear us talk about them, will either encourage a relationship with Jesus or discourage it. And this is so incredibly important. Okay? And I grew up, by the time I was 16, I hated Christians. And then I got invited by this Christian in this high school Bible study in my high school. He led a Bible study for other high schoolers. And I thought, this is perfect. I'm going to go there, be a pretend Christian, dismantle their faith, move on to the next one. And obviously, that was a great plan. Turned out real well. Right? And basically, I ended up coming to this conclusion that I still hold today, okay? I believe that God designed sex to be expressed in a marriage between one man and one woman. That's what I still believe today. But I also believe that a theological conviction is never a catalyst to devalue another human being. That your biblical beliefs must never be the basis to marginalize or sideline somebody else, because if it is, you can be correct in your doctrine and commit heresy by how you treat people. And so then I had to come out as a 16-year-old. I had to come out to my 3 activist gay parents as a 16-year-old Christian who wanted to be a pastor. That went about as well as some of you could imagine. And, I'm glad you laughed because it is funny, so don't feel bad with what I'm getting ready to tell you. They kicked me out. Yeah, don't feel guilt. Don't feel shame. No, it is funny. But, back then it wasn't. Now it is. But when I talk to LGBTQ students, a lot of them, they're like, well, I thought that, just conservative parents did that. And I'm like, no, Homo sapiens do that. Follow the science, people, okay? Homo sapien means human being. Follow the science with me, okay? If you're not a Homo sapien, I would love to talk to you afterwards. I have questions. Okay? People naturally feel fear of whatever they don't understand or who they don't understand or who or what makes them feel threatened. And we end up backing away when we should lean into our fear, because that fosters empathy, and we can lean into God, who has all authority and knows all, who's just completely sovereign. You see, this is the whole idea of sexual identity is so important. That's why tonight, if you parents, grandparents, if you have kids from preschool all the way up through high school, college, from 7 to 9 tonight, I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be talking about how do you talk to your kids, and how do you navigate sexuality with them? How do you talk to your kids about sexuality, gender, and identity? If you're a parent or grandparent or whatever, you need to be here if you can. Because if you are not actively having conversation with your students, with your kids about this, or you don't plan to as they get older, trust me, you are allowing other people to have those conversations. And I want to help you have those conversations without being a creeper, okay? So 7 to 9, we're going to have a Q&A. It's going to be anonymous, so it's not like, well, Francis asked this question. He lives on Normandy Street, okay? It's all going to be anonymous, so you don't need to be embarrassed, and hopefully you can make time to come back tonight. But this is so important because after I became a Christian, I really saw how important it is to have Jesus as your main identity. Because here's the deal, and Pastor Brian talked about this last week, and if you didn't get to hear or listen or watch his sermon, go on the website, go on the podcast of this church, and listen or watch Pastor Brian's sermon from last week, and it's fantastic. But you and I all have different identities. We all have different roles. Some of you are siblings. Some of you are parents. Some of you own your own business. Some of you are students. Some of you are working on your doctorate. Some of you are not. Some of you are looking for another job. Some of you are married to this person, that person. I mean, we all have different identities, okay? And too often what we end up doing is we end up trying to leverage other things that to be our primary identity, because everybody has a primary identity. And here's what I know, okay? Here's what I know about you, because again, you're a Homo sapien, you're breathing. I know this about you if you're breathing and you're alive, okay? I know this about you, that you are a sexual being. Every human being is a sexual being. Let me go further. Every human being is a broken sexual being. There's not one person that has it together, even if they act like it. They can act like they have everything together. Trust me, every single person alive is a broken sexual being. There's not one person broken more than the others. We all are equally broken, okay? And that's why whenever we try to build our identity on anything other than Jesus, when you build your identity on a foundation that is already cracked and already broken, it will eventually break even more because it cannot withstand the weight of who you are as a person. There's no possible way. And I know what society says. Society has said a lot of things that we don't believe anymore. So, I mean, just take a look. You go to Wikipedia. Everything on there is true, okay? You can see examples. But when you build your foundation on something that is already broken, you will eventually get hurt, and so will people around you. So, to talk about this, if you have your Bibles or your mobile device, you can turn to John chapter 4. And if you don't, we're going to have the words on the screen in just a moment. I'm going to read to you. Now, just to kind of set the scene for you in John chapter 4, Jesus is in this area that we're going to talk about in a minute called Samaria, where Jewish people usually didn't go. And he is at a well where people would go and get water for the day, and he's sitting at the well, and it's like the hottest part of the day when he's there. And this woman comes up to get some water. Nobody else is there except for her and Jesus because it's really hot. People either went in the morning or in the evening, and she goes during the hottest time of the day when nobody else went. So there's obviously something going on there, that we'll get to in a minute. But then she gets some water, and Jesus asks her for a drink. Says, hey, could you give me a drink? Because she already has her bucket down there. And here's what she says in John chapter 4, verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Okay? So back in, you remember Solomon, really wise guy, not like in the mafia, but, he had a lot of wisdom. Got to be careful how I say that. He's not a wise guy. He's got a lot of wisdom. Okay? Well, who knows? Maybe he was in the mafia. He was a king, right? That's never, see, ADHD, like that. Okay. Solomon, incredibly wise, had so much wisdom from God, and his son was the opposite, Rehoboam. When Solomon died, his son just was a jerk, and he basically became hard-nosed, and the kingdom of Israel split into Judah in the south, which is where Jesus came from, and Israel in the north. And Israel in the north eventually gave birth to Samaria, where Jesus is in right now, this region, this area, because these Jewish people up north ended up doing what God said not to do, marrying other people from other religions, not other races, okay, not other ethnicities, other religions. God said don't do that. They did that, and now their religion was just all kind of messed up. And here Jesus is talking to this woman. Jewish people went around Samaria. They called Samaritans half-breeds. That's how much they hated them. So when John writes right here, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans, he's just making that statement. Everybody in the first century reading the gospel or the second century would be like, oh yeah, I know that, huh? We read it and we're like, why not? Because they couldn't stand them. So Jesus crosses cultural, racial, ethnic barriers here. And plus, a Jewish rabbi would never be caught dead talking to a woman in private or public, and here he is, and he asks her for a drink. Now, there are some people that throw shade at Jesus. There are some people that say, well, why did Jesus want her to serve him? Okay, calm down, take your platform and your little sad announcement and go by yourself and play by yourself for a minute, okay? That is not what's happening. I can't stand it when people read the Bible and they don't think up first about what did this mean in the first century context. When Jesus asked her for a drink, Jewish people would never take food or water from Samaritans. When he asked her for a drink, he's asking her to drink from the cup that she physically drinks from. He is treating her as an equal. He is honoring the dignity of this woman. Because I don't know if you know this, here's what I believe, and hopefully you believe this too, that everybody has the same dignity. Everybody has the same equal intrinsic value. Everyone is someone that God created and Jesus died for. So he's treating her as an equal in this moment. Can you give me a drink? Why are you asking me for a drink? Listen to what the next part of this conversation. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and livestock? You can hear the sarcasm in her voice, can't you? Are you greater? Who do you think you are? Are you greater than Jacob? Like whose grandpa was Abraham? Whose son was Joseph? The guy with the Technicolor dream coat of many colors that Andrew Lloyd Webber talked about? You know what I'm talking about, right? That guy. You say you're greater than him? Now, Jesus could have just said, yeah. And he would have been correct. But I love what Jesus does here. Jesus doesn't focus on what she wants to know. Jesus focuses on what she needs to know. Look at verse 13. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of living water, welling up to eternal life. And the woman said to him, again, I think with sarcasm, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. Well, give me this water. If you'll never be thirsty again, I'd love to not be thirsty again. How many of you know it's been hot recently? Maybe it hasn't been hot up here. Maybe I brought the heat with me. I usually do that, okay? And that sounded weird. Anyway, but when down in LA, I was talking to my family the day before yesterday, it's 109. I'm like, who made God mad? There's probably an endless list in Los Angeles, right? Not that anybody ever does that in Northern California, but down in Southern California, somebody made God mad, and now it's 109. I'm like, we got to figure this out before we turn into Phoenix or Vegas, real quick, okay? But, can you imagine having this water where you're never thirsty? She is not getting the metaphor, or maybe she is, and she's just being sarcastic. Now, check out what Jesus does next, because this is interesting, okay? Jesus says to her, take a look at this, verse 16. He told her, go call your husband and come back. And I think she paused at that moment. You ever been caught doing something that you didn't think that you'd ever get caught? And then somebody catches you, or somebody tricks you into admitting it, and all of a sudden you're busted, you're owned in that minute. And you're just you pause because you're trying to process the fact that now they know. He says, here's her reply, verse 17, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. Now, there are a lot of preachers and commentaries when you read about this, and they'll say things like, well, Jesus is confronting her with the truth. Jesus is calling her to repent. Okay, well, I do believe there's an aspect of this, and there's another aspect of this. You want to hear it? Here's the other aspect of this, okay? In the first century, in Judea, where Jesus is from, and Samaria, in the first century, men divorced their wives for anything. A man could divorce his wife if his breakfast was burnt. Breakfast is awful. Divorced. I said I wanted soy riso, divorced. You know, you don't want to watch my show, divorced. I want to upgrade to a younger model, divorced. And the rabbis of the day were like, go ahead, do it. God's cool with it. That was their interpretation. I mean, they were treating women like livestock. It's why in Matthew 19, when Pharisees are trying to trick Jesus and they say, hey, is it true that a man can divorce his wife for any reason? And Jesus first quotes to them John 1:27, where he says, have you not heard that in the beginning God created them male and female? In other words, you both were created by God. He made you. In your nature, you're equal. You both have the same dignity. Everyone is someone that God created and that I'm going to die for. So quit treating women like cattle. But that's how they were treated, okay? Men could divorce their husbands. Wives could not divorce their husbands. It's very rare. And so I think that when Jesus was saying, you have been divorced 5 times, I think he's looking at her. And I think he's also saying, you know, you've had 5 husbands. You have been divorced 5 times. You have been rejected 5 times. What you have said is quite true. And the person you're with now is not your husband. I mean, look, I'm not justifying her decision, but do you blame her? Would you want to be married again if you were rejected 5 times? Guys, switch roles. Imagine that you are in somewhere else in the multiverse right now. And imagine that women have had all the power throughout the centuries and they could divorce you for anything. How would you feel? And yet, I think it's empathetic. Jesus is feeling with her. Yes, Jesus is confronting her about her life choices, but he's also being empathetic and he's acknowledging what she has gone through. And I think it's at this point that we see why this woman is coming at the hottest time of the day to get water. She's in a small town. My parents both came from small towns in Kansas. I don't know how many of you came from small towns. Everybody knows everybody else's business. Everybody knows your business before you know your business, okay? It's like Zuckerberg listening in all the time. I don't know. But like, they know. And back in the first century, they know. I mean, I know gossip doesn't happen here, ever in this area, but back there, everybody knew. And she got tired of going in the morning where all the other people are there and having people look at her and point and laugh or whisper. She got tired of listening to the chatter and gossip and hearing the people's fake hello, fake hi, fake this, because they had defined her by her sexuality, by her past, by her rejection, by her shame. All of that was placed on her, and she adopted that for herself, and she operated under that because I think she had come to believe that about herself. And what I love about Jesus is that you come to Jesus as you are, he will never leave you there. Okay, so they get in an argument. They get in a theological argument. She obviously knows. She's like, I can tell you're a prophet. Riddle me this. She asked him a theological question. Why do you Jewish people say we should worship down in Jerusalem when we think we should worship over here in Mount Gerizim? Now, if you ever thought that Jesus was just a nice guy and never told anybody they were wrong, you're wrong. Jesus flat out tells her in no uncertain terms, your theology is distorted. Your beliefs are wrong. Okay, look at verse 21. Woman, again, a polite term. Don't cancel Jesus. Polite. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. And he's talking about the line of David through which he comes from. And he basically tells her that the Father is looking for worshipers in both spirit and truth. He cares enough about her after being empathetic with her to share the truth with her. And the woman said, verse 25, I know that Messiah, called Christ, the word Messiah, when you see that, that is the Hebrew word for anointed one. Christ is the Greek word for anointed one. I know that Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And I love this. Everything. All the tension has been leading up to verse 26. Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Literally in Hebrew. In Greek, it is I. It's not just I am he, it is I am, period. There are times throughout the book of John where Jesus says, I am, and that is a callback to when Moses talked to God in the burning bush, and he told him, you must go and let my people go in Egypt and lead them. And Moses says, who should I tell them sent me? And God says, tell them I am. I am that I am. Tell them I am sent you. And right here, he says, I am. And this woman, I think, was changed. You know why? Because this woman who avoided the whole town now went to the whole town and said, you've got to meet this guy who told me everything I've done. I think she's the Messiah. You need to come meet with this guy. And she brought people to him. Why? Because her life was changed. She didn't care what people thought about her. Now she was amazed and enraptured with Jesus. And I think she learned this principle that all of us need to learn, and it is a throwback to what Pastor Brian is talking about in this series and what he talked about last week, that whose you are determines who you are. Whose you are determines who you are. We all belong to something. We all belong to someone, primarily. As I said, some of us belong to our work. That's why you get called workaholic. And you say, I'm not a workaholic, I'm just successful. Tell the truth, shame the devil. You know who you are. No, preacher, you don't understand. Again, take it up with God. Whatever you get your main validation from is your idol. Whoever you get all of us need validation, and wherever you mainly draw your validation from, that is where you get your identity from. Some of you, it's your work. Others of you, it's your family. You're like, I just love my family. No, you idolize them. And the pressure you put on them is going to destroy them and you. Some of you, it's your group of friends. Some of you, you're codependent. It's another person. Some of you, it's yourself and you're a narcissist. You're like, wow, Caleb, handing out condemnation cards. No, the thing is that all of us belong to someone or something until we give our lives to Jesus. And then we spend the rest of our life giving our lives to Jesus every day, every hour, every second to keep him on the throne of our lives instead of ourselves, or instead of reverting backwards. And in the first century, there was no such thing as identifying primarily by your sexuality or your gender identity. And today, it's new. And anytime something is new like that, alarm bells should be going off in your head. You're like, well, maybe we just knew things that they didn't know back then. Yeah, we do, but maybe they also know things that we don't know today. I don't like the deconstructionism where we say, oh, we're so much smarter than they were back then. We're enlightened. Okay, elitism eventually gets taken down. Hear me out on this. When you try to build your identity on something like your sexuality, it eventually breaks apart. You will get hurt and others will get hurt. Whose you are determines who you are. And I wrote this down in my notes. Jesus redeems the flaws and bad moments in your story. Some of you can't move past your past. You can't get past it. And you don't realize that whenever you can't let go of your past, you smuggle your past into your present, and you smuggle your past into your future. Some of you, you have allowed other people to shame you and categorize you, and you have taken on that identity. Look, I'm somebody that believes, like I know a lot of people who relate or identify as LGBTQ. I don't know anybody, not one person, who is truly LGBTQ, who is truly same-sex attracted, who has ever become not same-sex attracted. I don't know anybody. But for me, the goal is not heterosexuality. That's creepy. You know what the goal is? Becoming a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. That's the goal. So how do we live this out? I got to go real quick, okay? Number one, invite Jesus into your story. Why? Because stabilizing your insecurities in sinful ways makes God's word seem like harsh rules rather than loving guardrails. I get asked this question a lot. Why does God care who I sleep with? Why does God put up all these boundaries, all these guardrails around sex? You want to know my favorite theological answer? Some of you are going to think it's a cop-out. Some of you are going to like it. I like it. I don't use it all the time, but I use it when I need to. You ready? This is going to be great. You ready for the silver bullet? Here it is. I don't know. I love that answer. You know why? Because you buy more credibility with people when you say, I don't know, but let's find out together. I don't know. Let me think about that. When you try to answer and you don't know, or you try to answer and you don't see the question behind the question, because sometimes people ask a question and that's not really the question they're asking. It's really deeply personal. And when you give just, standard theological answers to a deeply personal question, I mean, you unintentionally seem like you don't care. See, I tell people all the time, I believe God can look down the corridor of time. I believe God knows everything that was, is, and will be. And maybe, just maybe, God put loving guardrails around different things like sex. And maybe it's because there are things he sees that we can't. Maybe he's like, look, I know you're not going to understand. I know you're not going to get it, but I need you to trust me on this. Because I can see the beginning from the end. And I can see where things are headed. And even you can't see that. And so I think faith comes in there. Next is this: if we want to live out who you are determines who you are, realize that all of your decisions are spiritual. There's not one decision you make that isn't spiritual. You're like, okay, Caleb, I put my Bible down on the seat. Like, okay, Einstein, great. Missing the point right here. All of our decisions are spiritual. All of them. Okay? You can't divorce spiritual reality from the decisions you make or the actions you take. There's this new movement, where people are like, well, it doesn't matter what I do with my body because, my spirit connects with God. Huh? Do you not realize your body is as spiritual as your spirit or soul? What do you think your body uses as a vehicle? To have dinner with people, to have deep conversations with people, to hug people, to talk with people. What does your spirit use? Your spirit uses your body. And when we try to separate and say, well, there's a difference between body and soul, there is a difference between body and soul or body and spirit. But when we try to leverage that to do whatever we want, you know what we're doing? We're acting like we're dead. Like, how do you think that? What happens when your spirit leaves your body? You die. And there are a lot of us, when we do whatever we want, it's like we're acting as if we're dead, separating spirit and body. One of the biggest tricks the devil ever pulled was making us believe that the majority of our decisions are not spiritual and that they don't have long-term consequences when they do. So here's what we do. Surrender times whatever number that is up there. I don't know what number that is. I don't care. If you come up to me afterwards and say, well, this is how you pronounce it, I don't care. I'm going to walk away from the conversation, okay? Don't get triggered. I'm letting all of you STEM people know right now. You say, well, that's how you pronounce it. I don't care. I'm not going to repeat that. You're literally wasting your breath. You will die sooner than if you would have kept that to yourself and kept your breath. Because I don't care. I'm just going to say that number right there, okay? If you want to live out your identity for Jesus, you've got to surrender every single day. As I wrote this down in my notes, whatever you refuse to surrender becomes the lid for your spiritual growth. Whatever or whoever it is in your life becomes the lid when you refuse to surrender it. You are as strong as whatever it is you refuse to surrender to God. Because all of our life, after we accept Jesus, is basically us continually surrendering to God. And I'll give you an example, okay? There's a reason, I guess I am giving you a reason, but there's a reason why I think, sex outside of God's guardrails is so dangerous. So there are 4 main words in the Greek language for love. And you see this not only in the Bible, but you see it in secular literature. There's agape, which is godly love. There is phileo, which is relational love, friendship love. There is strage, which is parental love or family love. And there's eros, which you know what kind of love that is. And what's interesting is that, number one, Jesus says all of these other 3 loves will be in heaven except for eros. Eros will not. Not in the way that we think of it now, but both in the Bible, the New Testament, and in literature outside of the Bible, When eros is tethered to all three of these loves, it is beautiful. It is something to be admired. It is something that connects you. But whenever eros is separated from these loves, it becomes destructive and it destroys. It's like a fire. When you're camping and you have boundaries around the fire, it's mesmerizing. You're like, that's why people watching the campfire are like, You know what I mean? When like you watch your fireplace, it's mesmerizing. But what happens when a fire gets beyond the boundaries? It destroys. That which is beautiful destroys, and it's the same thing with sex. And so if you're a Christian, here's what your main job is. Your main job is to not make LGBTQ people straight. That's creepy. You become a creeper. Don't do that. Okay? By the way, you can't change anybody. You had to repent to accept Jesus. You had to admit your life was out of control and you can't live your life on your own. Who are you going to fix? Right? Well, I would cheat. No, you haven't. No, you haven't. Okay? Take your Adderall and join the rest of us in reality. You haven't. You know what our job is? Think deeper about people and just point them to Jesus. Now, I gotta end real quick. So we're in whatever. I got married. We moved after 11 years of ministry in Los Angeles. My wife and kids and I moved to Dallas, Texas, because we've all got to live in purgatory at some point. Well, it's hostile. Jerry Jones is there, and the Cowboys. They're there. So here's the deal. So my mom and dad, separately of one another, moved down to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to our family. And I didn't know what to think because earlier, my mother's partner, after they were together for 22 years, died from cancer. And I remember the week that she died. My mom had turned our dining room into a makeshift hospice room in their house in Kansas City. I flew back and I made a deal with God. I said, God, I want to share the gospel with Vera one last time, but I'm not going to force it. If you can make that happen, please, but I'm not going to force it. And I'm there the first day, second day, third day, first night, second night, third night, nothing. And on the very last night, I'm the only one awake late at night sitting next to Vera as she's in and out of consciousness, and she was asleep at that time, and I'm arguing with God in my head. Have you ever argued with God in your head before? Okay, I'm not saying you should. I'm just being authentic because, we're in church. We can't lie here, so I'm just being authentic with you. And I'm arguing. I'm like, God, why? I thought we were partnering. Why didn't you open up the door? I don't want this to be an intervention. And then literally, as I'm talking to God in my head, Vera wakes up and she looks at me and she says, Caleb, what do you think is on the other side? I'm like, Jesus is. And I know I haven't been the best of explaining this to you in the past, but hear me out here. If you accept Jesus right now, the same grace that saves you will carry you into the next life. All you have to do is trust Jesus. She looked me dead in the eye and she said, no. And she said, pathetic. She said, you know what I think about you and Christians? I think you're weak. You can't make it through life on your own. That's what I think. And I said, well, then you're halfway to salvation because I am weak. And Jesus is not my crutch. He's my wheelbarrow. And I'm in the wheelbarrow that he's pushing. He's driving. I'm not even in the back seat or the passenger seat. I'm in the trunk, and he's got me bound with duct tape and gagged with chloroform. Because you're right, Vera, I can't live my life on my own. Human beings make consistently bad decisions. If you don't believe me, go to LAX someday, and you'll see. Human beings are horrible decision makers. She said no. And when she said no, I saw it in that moment. I saw everybody that had throughout her life that had beat her over the head with the Bible, that had just hit her and said, you're the reason why our society's like this. You're the reason why we're going downhill. You and your community, you and this, and just hitting her over the head with this. And I saw the names that she was called, and I saw how she had ascribed all of that to Jesus, and the very words of the people that represent the man that gave his life and his blood for her, who raised for her. Those very same people were the ones who were partially responsible for this false identity that she had adopted, this false primary identity, and they were the ones who were partially responsible for her not becoming a Christian, I was sad and I was scared and I was upset. How dare we misappropriate the blood of Christ like that? And unless a miracle happened, she died without Christ. I don't want to leave you leaving like that. So here's the last part of this. My parents, after they moved to Texas, started attending the church that I was preaching at, even though, they knew that I believed in. And at the ages of 69 and 70, before my family and I moved back to Southern California, my mom and dad gave their lives to Jesus Christ. They trusted him. My dad went to be with the Lord 8 weeks ago, suddenly, because of COVID. And my dad was always an angry person. He had so much pain and hurt. But I think about my dad now, and I think about Vera, and here are two totally different responses to identity. You know where my dad is now? He is in the presence of the living God. He is a complete person. Even though I have the memories of a battered relationship down here, I get to know that new person for the rest of my eternity. Here's the deal. Whose you are determines who you are. Everything you do is spiritual. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. In just a moment, we're going to take communion. And if you don't want to take communion, if it's new to you and you're unsure, or you're just like, I have some things I need to work on, that's fine, but hear me out on this. When you take that communion, I want you to remember God's love for you. Let me pray for you. Lord, thank you so much for today. Help us, whether we are saved or not, to remember that whose you are determines who you are. That where we get our validation from determines who or what we're idolizing. May we look to you, and may we treat other people well, and may we love people well. It's in your son's name I pray, amen.